Hello and welcome to an essay plan that is going to compare My Last Duchess with Ozymandias. This video will show you how to compare the two poems effectively. There's lots of videos that will do a really good job of analysing each poem in isolation, which is important, but that is only step one. Step two is to compare the two poems, which means to write about their similarities and their differences. That is what the examiner wants, and that is what this video is going to do. So very shortly we will have a look at the question, but you will notice here two examples of introductions about pride, both of which are perfectly acceptable. The first one you will see there just links back to the upcoming keyword. The second introduction here allows us to just embellish it a little bit more, answer the question, and put in a bit of context. I'll leave that up on the screen for you to have a look at, and when we go through this essay, maybe you'll go back to this portion of the video and see whether you like it. So if we presume that the question is as follows: compare how poets present the power of pride in My Last Duchess and one other poem, I'm suggesting in this essay that Ozymandias would be a good poem to which you may wish to compare it with. And here is a good sentence starter that I hope gets us going. Both poems use consonants to emphasize how each speaker feels they are so proud that they are like gods. So here, everybody, I'm ultimately using the idea of gods and, I suppose, religion to form a comparison between the two. I happen to have mentioned consonants in my sentence starter. It's not absolutely vital that I do that immediately in the sentence starter, the idea of putting in a technical term like that. You definitely want to be doing that for the second part of the unseen poem question. But as my big idea here, which is all about religion and gods, happens to also feature consonants in both of the points that I'm about to make, I've chosen to mention it in my topic sentence as well. So what's my evidence? Well, in My Last Duchess, he concludes the poem by claiming or inviting us to notice Neptune taming a seahorse, where you may remember he's talking about a miniature sculpture that the fictional sculptor Klaus of Innsbruck has cast in bronze for him. He ultimately feels a huge affinity with such a powerful and mighty sea god, such as Neptune, because what is Neptune doing? Taming a seahorse, allegedly. And that is ultimately reflecting what he does in real life when he is taming the Duchess, I'm sorry to say. This sentence happens to have consonants in it, notice Neptune, so that nicely links us to a similarly religious-themed reference in Ozymandias, where there is also consonants, when Ozymandias invited us, please, to look upon his works, because his name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. So he also thinks he's like a god, because that is a religious phrase that we would associate with Jesus. But then my paragraph would go on. However, only one of them does continue to live like a strong, omnipotent ruler. Omnipotent meaning all-powerful. And that's the Duke of Ferrara in My Last Duchess. This is different to Ozymandias, who has deluded himself into thinking he is a powerful force, like a god, that will last forever. Sentence starter number 2, and so paragraph number 2. Whereas Ozymandias presents the notion of lost pride, My Last Duchess presents the notion of permanent pride that will never be lost. So what's my evidence for this? Well, in Ozymandias, we rather build up to a bit of a climax with a very powerful adjective and a very powerful verb about how you must look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. That sounds pretty good. But they then appear comically misplaced after the volta that very quickly follows when we learn nothing beside remains. This volta provides a short, emphatic, blunt sentence which brings this big crescendo of a legacy to an end. That I'm suggesting in this paragraph is slightly different to My Last Duchess, where, of course, the Duke of Ferrara is still alive when he recounts his tale of pride and his tale of power, quite unlike Ozymandias, who would have died many years before the antique traveller came across him. We also have a cyclical quality, the fact that this is just one duchess of many duchesses. And it just suggests an endless procession of duchesses, an endless procession, I'm very sorry to say, of people that he can be more powerful than, and as a result feel quite proud of. Of course, the adjective last in the title simply means my most previous duchess. There are going to be others that follow. Here's a really clever point to extend this paragraph further. The assonance contained in I choose never to stoop. The assonance here, I'm suggesting, elongates the sentence. It literally makes it sound longer. And the fact that the sentence is, as it were, elongated and stretched out only further serves to emphasize the longevity and the length of his power and pride. Of course, he also makes reference to a 900-year-old name, which implies a very, very, very long-lasting legacy, all of which is in total contrast to Ozymandias. Sentence starter number 3, paragraph number 3, and there's a lot of ideas here, everybody, which serves as another reminder that with all of this, by all means do, of course, think about fleshing them out into separate paragraphs or not necessarily referring to things that you don't gel with. There's a lot going on here, but let's try and get it all through into one nice big meaty paragraph. So whereas in Ozymandias pride spills into a violent arrogance, we can now find humorous, we are chilled, we are rather scared and intimidated by the Duke's violent arrogance and how he misreads his wife's affection. So this is ultimately a paragraph which combines ideas of violence, ideas of arrogance, which is of course a sense of pride, and rather ambitiously perhaps is trying to talk about the humour that we can read into Ozymandias doing this, but the total lack of humour and, to be honest, sense of intimidation that we may derive from reading My Last Duchess. So where am I going with all of this? Well, my evidence examiner is that when we consider a lot of the language that is used in Ozymandias, the fact that we have the verb stamped, the fact that the things are lifeless, the fact that he has a wrinkled lip, I'm suggesting that might have something to do with violence. Generally speaking, it is a facial expression of aggression. And the fact that these verbs where he mocked and sneered at the people, as well as being so arrogant he thought he was king of kings, I'm suggesting that perhaps all of this combines to produce a powerful lexical field that connotes aloofness, which is a nice word for basically just thinking you're better than other people, but also a sense of violence there. We might find this all humorous because of what's been said in the previous paragraph, however. This powerful, violent expression over other people is now just completely and utterly gone, and what you thought was so impressive, Ozymandias, is now being completely destroyed. But we get a sense of a total lack of humour and actually being quite chilled by similar expressions of violence and similar expressions of arrogance in My Last Duchess. What's my evidence for this? Well, quite a lot, I think. First of all, the possessive pronoun my in the title, and indeed throughout the poem, implies objectification of the Duchess. When he talks about her blushing and the colour of her face, he claims how it might have dyed along her throat, and the blushes in her cheek are a spot of joy. I'm suggesting that these are all quite endearing blushes. She feels quite flattered when she receives modest gifts or people pay her compliments. But the fact that he uses the violent imagery of it dying along her throat, which clearly inspires ideas, I'm sorry to say, perhaps of a slit throat. And when he claims that these blushes are spots and therefore slight blemishes, you get the sense of the violence and the anger at what is in fact perfectly natural human reactions from the Duchess. Again, following that on, a bough of cherries and a lovely donkey ride on a mule. These imply simple pleasures, but they contrast with as if somehow I know not how she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. That's a sudden, strong, quite violent overreaction to what are, of course, perfectly pleasant gifts that people give her. And that, I think, is quite a clever thing to say, and I hope that further, let's get down into the structure of this, the repeated caesuras, which we remember are pauses within the poem. I'm suggesting that they quite violently disrupt the iambic pentameter of the poem, and they imply his stuttering disbelief. Iambic pentameter, everybody, we may remember as a rather slow, lulling, soothing rhythm, which is meant to mimic a heartbeat. And so if the iambic pentameter, which is a calming presence mimicking a heartbeat, is disrupted, it's almost as if the heartbeat is being disrupted. It's almost as if it's reflecting the fact that, I'm sorry to say, he paid people to end her life. We see that with I gave commands, caesura, all smiles stopped together. That's sibilance as well, adding to the calm, slow, sinister extinguishing of the iambic pentameter, which is, of course, for reasons that I've implied, are violent. A lot going on there. See what you can do with that. So that was quite a big one. Let's simplify things a little bit more. Both poets portray protagonists who are so proud that they are both not ashamed to command others. So basically, everybody, I'm noticing that both poems have many commands in them, and I'm just seeking to compare this. In Ozymandias has asked us to look upon my works, ye mighty in despair. That's a command. But to complicate this further and get more marks, the distance created by this order. The fact that we only get this order via an antique traveller, a nomad who would wander the earth. And then it's the poet who is also recounting the words of this antique traveller, surely diminishes the pride that he may have had in being able to give this order. And so we're not necessarily threatened or necessarily upset by receiving this order. I'm suggesting this is slightly different from My Last Duchess, where the Duke of Ferrara, again as said, with these caesuras, slowing the pace of the poem down so it suits him, claims this grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. He also demands at the end that the person he is with, the emissary from the visiting family, says, would you please sit and look at her? And would you please rise? And the final sentence starter that I would come up with, everybody, is, again, quite a simple, straightforward one, possibly one to include in the introduction, perhaps, or to complement any other points you've got. And it is as follows. The pride in themselves turns into love for themselves, and this is reflected in the forms of the poems. So Ozymandias, we know, is a mixture of several separate sonnets, which is, of course, ironic. A sonnet is a love poem. How can a poem that's all about arrogance and pride and thinking that your power will outlive nature and time can possibly be compatible with what we would traditionally associate with a love poem? Well, that's what is done. My Last Duchess, however, is a dramatic monologue, and we may claim that he goes so far as to love the sound of his own voice. It is one person talking without any breaks, without any stanza breaks, in a quite rigid couplet form, until he chooses to end his long speech. So it's almost as if he has, if not a love for his voice, certainly a very strong affection for it. And a really nice point about irony to finish off with is that we could say in our essays, surely the forms of each poem should be the other way around. Considering that Ozymandias is all about a very arrogant ruler, surely that should be the dramatic monologue. And My Last Duchess, okay, it's also about another arrogant ruler, but it is at least to do with love, if not a misplaced love. It is to do with marriage, if not a rather unpleasant marriage. So you would surely expect that to be perhaps in a sonnet form. It's not about a particularly pleasant love, but it is at least about marriage and about strong affection, certainly that one person used to have for somebody else.